Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. To begin our program, it's my pleasure to ask you to join me in welcoming the president of the Union League Club of Chicago, Mr. William J. Nissen.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the officers and directors of the club, I'm very proud to welcome you to the 130th Annual George Washington's Birthday Gala. It is with great pleasure that we welcome to this evening's celebration Ohio Governor John Kasich. Governor, we are honored to have you here tonight with us. As most of you know, our first observance of George Washington's birthday took place in 1887 in the wake of Chicago's infamous Haymarket riots. The club's leaders believed that one of the things that contributed to that tragic incident was a lack of understanding of the meaning of American citizenship. So they established this annual event in the hope that it would help unite the hearts of all citizens, promote a feeling of solidarity in an increasingly diverse Chicago. This celebration, therefore, has a special purpose within our club, to promote the virtues of patriotism and to remind us all of the duties of citizenship and enduring values we share as Americans. But tonight, as we reflect upon our history, we also look forward to our club's future. Tonight, we renew our commitment to community and country as we add our own chapter to the ongoing story of the Union League Club of Chicago. Tonight, we also acknowledge individuals whose leadership has sustained our club over the years. We are joined by several of our club's past presidents. As I read their names, I ask that they stand. Please hold your applause till all have risen. Michael Choros, David Hansen, Terry Hendrickson, Guy Maris, and Nina Owen. Mr. James Gatziolis as well. Let us thank these leaders for their enduring contributions to the Union League Club of Chicago. We also welcome our club's officers and directors, our first vice president, Edward Cooper, the club's second vice president, Martha Jan Martin, our club treasurer, Kathy Manning, our board secretary, Bill Wagoda. And please join me in welcoming our club directors, Jeffrey Chen, Cynthia Dollaty, Steve Goodwin, Roger Hickey, Jerry Kern, DJ Shade, and R.D. Yant. And we are also honored to welcome tonight the Consul General of Japan, Mr. Naoki Ito. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're also honored to welcome tonight the Commanding Officer of U.S. Coast Guard Marine Safety Unit Chicago, Commander Zeta Merchant. As you know, tonight's event is our club's annual salute to patriotism when we reflect upon the values we share as citizens of this great nation. In that spirit, we had secured for our celebration a performance by Navy Band Great Lakes. Unfortunately, we learned this morning that for safety reasons, the commanders at Great Lakes have ordered all personnel to remain on the base, so they are unable to be with us tonight. Thankfully, however, the wonderful vocalist of the Mark Strader Band, Rachel Peterson, is with us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise as Rachel performs our national anthem, accompanied by Mark Strader on piano.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the
Rachel, thank you very much. Now I call upon the commander of Union League, American Legion Post 758, Mr. Chuck Korch, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. And now to offer the invocation, I call upon the chaplain of Union League American Legion Post 758, Mr. Bill Wagoda.
Thank you, Mr. President. George Washington was an avowed man of God, yet espoused the tenets of no particular religion and worshiped at a variety of Christian congregations. He joined fellow founding fathers in the insistence that the leaders of this nation should stay silent on the question of doctrine and denomination, because in their silence, as George Washington said, they would avoid unnecessary divisiveness while promoting the virtues of religion in general. George Washington's belief in God was a requisite to his membership in the Freemasons, but he actively encouraged the works of religious communities regardless of their devotional affiliations. To a Jewish congregation in Rhode Island, he wrote, "The majority factions in this nation do not just indulge or tolerate a minority class of religion. Instead, the government of the United States requires only that they live under its protection and should demean themselves as good citizens." Our honored guest this evening is no stranger to George Washington's principles, that America shines best when its leaders channel the assets of all of its citizens, regardless of personal creed or doctrine. With his Office of Faith-Based Communities and Initiatives, Governor Kasich collars the fervor of Ohio's religious groups and not-for-profits under one umbrella to collaborate in solving problems for the betterment of the entire state. In our divisive times, Governor Kasich's organized alliance of different faiths and charitable organizations to optimize their potential for good seems outright revolutionary. But it is a practical application of George Washington's notion that the good citizen outruns the pious zealot every time when it comes to achieving the founder's ideals. The governor himself has been known to put greater good before individual affiliation when declaring firmly, "Country before party, always." Our club prides itself on its commitment to the sacred obligations of citizenship and the promotions of honesty and efficiency of our government. On this occasion, to welcome Governor Kasich and celebrate George Washington's birthday, I can think of no better invocation than the prayer that George Washington wrote for his country in June of 1783 in his last letter as Commander-in-Chief. In it, he prayed for the qualities of citizenhood that make possible the attainment of ideals common to our founding fathers, to our keynote speaker, and to our club. These ideals make George Washington's prayer as relevant tonight as it was in 1783. Accordingly, we pray much as George Washington did. God, keep the United States in your holy protection and impress upon the hearts of its citizens to cultivate a spirit of subordination and obedience to government, and to entertain a brotherly affection and love for one another and for the fellow citizens at large. We pray that God will graciously dispose all of us to do justice, love mercy, and demean ourselves to charity, humility, and peaceful temper of mind, without which we can never hope to be a happy nation. Bless this meal we are about to enjoy and those who prepared it. Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has brought forth bread from the earth. And we say, Amen.
Thank you, Bill. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we continue with our dinner service, after which we will resume our program and hear from Governor Kasich. Please enjoy dinner.
And please, again, welcome the president of the Union League Club of Chicago, Mr. William Nissen.
All right. Fellow members, as I mentioned earlier, we gather tonight to reflect upon the legacy of President Washington and to rededicate ourselves to the values of service and patriotism. We have reaffirmed those values in many ways, and in keeping with one of our most important traditions, we do so by hearing from a distinguished speaker. Our speaker tonight certainly fits that description. The governor's background is in your programs, and I hope you've had an opportunity to read that. But as with every well-known leader, the reality of who John Kasich is goes well beyond his official biography. And what isn't in that official bio can tell you a lot about who he is and the values he holds dear. John Kasich grew up as a blue-collar kid in a little town near Pittsburgh called McKees Rocks. His father was a postman and carried mail on his back for 29 years. His mother worked the late shift at a Pittsburgh postal center. Here's what one of his childhood friends said about the governor's dad. Everybody loved Mr. Kasich. He was the type of guy who, if you wanted to mail a letter but didn't have a stamp, you could tape a nickel on it, and he would put a stamp on it once he got back to the post office at the end of his route. Kindness, helping one another. Those are the kinds of values that John Kasich grew up with and that have characterized his remarkable career in public service. These are also the values he discusses in his most recent book, Two Paths, America Divided or United, which many of us were fortunate to hear about when he appeared here at our authors group last May. As one book reviewer observed, Governor Kasich worries that Americans have fallen out of the habit of caring for one another, instead living with their heads down and expecting far-off government leaders to solve problems. These ideas resonate deeply here at the Union League Club of Chicago, where through our three foundations, our Boys and Girls Clubs Foundation, Lumen Arts Cultural Foundation, and Chicago Engineers Foundation, our members have never fallen out of the habit of caring for one another, and we have never forgotten our shared responsibilities, what we call our commitment to community and country. Another aspect of John Kasich's character that is so unusual in a politician is his honesty. He doesn't tell people what they want to hear. He tells them the truth and what they need to know. But as we all saw during the 2016 election cycle, Governor, sometimes telling the truth can be a risky strategy. There's a brief excerpt from the governor's book I'd like to share with you that demonstrates his candor and his character. Here's the passage in his words. Before I was elected to the Ohio Senate, there was a push to build a bridge in my district. My constituents were all for it and wanted some assurances from me that this was something I could get done after I was elected. So I went to then Governor Jim Rhodes and asked him about it. I said, is this something we're going to be able to do for these people? He said, just tell them you'll get it for them, and we'll see what happens. That response didn't sit well with John Kasich. As he says in his book, that was the way of doing things in politics. I was learning, and I didn't like it. So I stood against it. I didn't like it then, and I don't like it now. From the very beginning, when I gave people my word, I meant to keep it. And we've experienced that from Governor Kasich here tonight. He kept his word to come here. We had this event originally scheduled for next weekend, and it was called to go to a meeting of world leaders in Munich, Germany next weekend. And rather than just canceling on us, he agreed to come here this weekend. And then he was not feeling well. He's been sick, and he's ready to go to Europe. And we had this huge snowstorm, and Governor Kasich came anyway. And so he has really shown his all for us. This evening, we're fortunate to hear from hear from someone who embraces our commitment to community and country. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Governor John Kasich. Thank you, Governor.
Well, listen, please, you're very nice, please. So, sit down. Thank you. Look, I may fall down on this podium. I've spent the last 2 or 3 months. I have more stuff that I could put on my hands, you know, to not get sick, and then somehow I was saying at the table here, he said, a gentleman said, "Do you having a long day?" I said, "Well, you know, not that long. I rolled out of bed at 2 and got on a plane at 3, and I'm here." He goes, "Well, that's a long day." I said, "No, not 2 a.m., 2 p.m. So for anybody I touch tonight, wash your hands, please. You don't want to have this. And I didn't want to miss this. In fact, my wife said, "You're leaving. You're going. I don't care how you feel." And I brought a couple of my buddies with me, and it's great to be here. It was wonderful to be in the room upstairs, to be here in this room. I mean, this is just an incredible place, and you should be so proud of this club and how it's being maintained and all that you're doing here. I think it's, and that's no suck-up. I'm just very, very impressed with what you're doing. And listen, I don't know where this is going to probably be a pretty short talk, and I told him I would take some questions, because I really don't know how this is going to go. You know, I was telling one of my friends, you know, when I'm getting ready to do my State of the State address, and I did an inaugural address when I was reelected as governor, and it was very odd and very different, and it turned out to be a good success. I was pleased to report. I have no idea how you're going to feel about this, but this is something that comes from my heart, and the things that I think are really, really important. And I'm going to deliver it here, and probably what I'm going to deliver at my State of the State. Because, you know, frankly, I don't know about you, but I'm tired of politicians and listening to all this garble and all this stuff that you hear all the time. It's pretty boring to me. We could debate these issues all day long, and the problem is today in America, no matter who you're talking to, there's this thought bubble, and it's different than somebody sitting next to you, and everybody has different opinions, and we don't just have them anymore. Now we fight about them if we have an opportunity, and it's getting kind of sad, isn't it? Can't even have holiday dinners anymore at home because I can't invite the aunt because she loves Trump, or this person hates Trump, loves Bernie Sanders. It's unbelievable what has been happening in our country. You know, a couple things. What I think is so interesting, and there was, you know, the Gilded Age. I was talking to one of my friends. I was coming out here for this Haymarket business that happened, and a lot of it, they say, is about the ethnic difficulties. I see it as more complicated than that. I think the Haymarket was an age when everything seemed to be spinning out of control. It was an economic movement, and perhaps the ethnic fighting is not much different than the kind of fighting we see today in America that circles around immigration. But to think about what those times were like in an industrial revolution where people had a job and then they became so fearful that they would not have a job tomorrow, and what would happen to their family, and what would happen to their friends, and what would happen to their communities, and it created incredible stress. And out of that terrible tragedy, you all got together, none of you here, I haven't seen anybody that old here tonight, but you all got together and said, we need to do something about this. We don't need the governor to come in his fancy horse and buggy. We don't need anybody. Let us, as folks that live here in Chicagoland, let's see what we can do to pull things together. And you centered around, you know, an incredible leader, George Washington. He's always been my favorite president. I don't think I can tell you why, other than you just look at him, right? And this was such an interesting thing because when you study things about George Washington, and I'm not an expert, Washington was operating in very uncharted territory. All they knew were kings, monarchs, and all of a sudden we have this brand new experiment here in the United States, and George Washington becomes our first president. And he had a lot of choices. You know, one of the things that I think is particularly interesting about Washington is How was he going to dress? You see, because if he dressed too fancy, then he would reflect on a monarchy. But if he dressed too much like all the rest of us, then he wasn't carrying a certain stature in the way that he operated. And so he kind of picked the middle path. And if you read some of the stories about his shoes and how he had buckles on his shoes, but he didn't want to be too fancy, and how he comported himself and carried himself with such elegance and with such grace and with such humility. And of course, the greatest thing about George Washington, of all the things that we can think about, in my opinion, is how he gave up power. You know, you look at politicians today, or CEOs today, or so many people today, athletes at times, their jobs define them. You know, it's natural, isn't it? It's natural that you want to cling to what you have because in some respects it gives you your personal power. But in reality, you are not what your job is. Your power comes from yourself. It doesn't come from your association, your condition, your wealth, none of that is what really matters. And I think Washington was a reluctant person. Yeah, he was 2 terms as the president, but what was, I think, so interesting about it is he always was longing to go home, to go back to the plantation, because that's where his heart was. His heart was in the soil. His heart was in service. And so after 2 terms, when he could have probably been president for 50 years, or maybe not that long, but for a long period of time, Washington said, I've had enough. And anybody that can move away, anyone who knows when it's the right time to get off the stage, and that doesn't mean you have to quit living, it doesn't mean you have to go into retirement, but you get off the stage. I have great respect for that. And that's why I think Washington is my most favorite president of all of them. Now, I want to talk to you about something much different than that. And that is, and I actually have made some notes here. You know, I've been thinking about mankind, believe it or not. I've thought about people who, from the beginning of time, wondered what our purpose was on earth. You might remember that when you were in college, late nights, with more drinks than you should have, how you sat around talking about the meaning of life, the purpose of life. And of course, throughout human history, people have spent time trying to figure out what our purpose is. You can look at Plato. You can look at his student, Aristotle, where they talked about virtue. You can think about, moving right throughout history, Epicurus, Nietzsche. We know Nietzsche was a negative. Rousseau, or Camus, you know, one of the great existentialists, John Locke, Cicero, and the great theologians. And I listed 4, and there's more, of course, but Augustine. In fact, I go to a church called St. Augustine's. Aquinas, who said that faith and reason go together. Very, very important thing to have been said, because it wasn't just about blind faith, it was about faith and reason, and about science, which is so important today. Or Martin Luther. And think about Martin Luther for a second. Here was a guy that challenged the entire church structure, put his own life on the line. They were tracking him down. They wanted to kill him because he dared challenge a church that was collecting money from people, saying the more money you give, the more souls who you love will get to heaven. Indulgences, they called it. And he pounded his message on the door of the church and set the world afire. Or one of my favorites of all time, William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce is the man who worked and gave his life to abolish the slave trade in Great Britain, and he was also a great man who brought what was called manners back to Great Britain. Manners being nothing more than virtue. So when I think about these things, and if I still sit down with my buddies when they come and visit me, and we sit outside and we still talk about the meaning of life, and I hope you still think about what is the meaning of life. I can tell you this, If you ever have a dinner around the table with your kids and you say, children, have you ever thought about the meaning of life? They'll be shocked and they'll be impressed because of why you might be thinking so differently in a time when everything is so fast-paced. So we can think about where we come down on this. There are a group of people who do many, many great things, people who I greatly admire. They're called humanists. Now, humanists are people who really, they may be agnostic, they may not even have a personal faith, but they believe in getting up every day and improving the world. They think that they should do what they can every single day to look at their neighbor and to make sure that that society that they live in is going to be improved. And I have a number of friends who are humanists, and I have great respect for them. But I've gone much deeper than that. I've gone, I think, much deeper than that because I've been persuaded by many of the theologians that I've studied, and I've only mentioned a few. William Law, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. What I found interesting is that when you take the great religions, and it was interesting how the gentleman was talking about religion and here, and we don't pick one or another. Jews, Christians, and Muslims all basically have the same view of the creation story. I don't know if you knew this or not. You know, we hear about Muslims, we don't know that much about them. Well, they have the same view of the creation story as Jews and Christians do. And you know what it is? That we have a unique human life. That there's so much life in the world, but nothing like human beings. And that our purpose, they all say that our purpose is to reflect the Creator. Our purpose is to remember that we are all made in the image of our Creator. I buy that. And I think it is so important for us to think about this today, that every human life is unique. Think about that for a second. Every human life is unique. In the middle of gnashing of teeth on many of these really contentious issues, do we lose sight as people about the value of human life? And when we think about America, that's one way to think about the fighting that goes on, and, you know, DACA and this group, and we're going to ship them out and all this other business. I don't know if anybody, if enough people stop and think about the fact that that's a human being. Now, what the law is and what we should do, but let's hold on now and think about it. Over in Europe with the parade of the migrants, it took a couple people in rafts, little kids, washing up on the shore to get the attention of the world about the significance of that life. I think when we stop and think about this in a deep way, we begin to be more effective as people. And if in fact we are made in God's image, and if our purpose is to reflect the glory of God, and that is according to the Jewish and Christian scripture, to reflect the glory of God, what does that mean? How does one reflect the glory of a creator? Well, it's really written right there. It's a good roadmap. It's been mentioned. Humility, justice, forgiveness, mercy, love, never said better than in the second most important commandment, love your neighbor as you love yourself. The issue of every life having dignity. These are called virtues. And when we practice these, when we show compassion and we give forgiveness to our enemies, when we can seek justice and truth and mercy, I believe from looking at the roadmap in the scriptures, we begin to reflect the glory of God. Now, all of us fall short of this, but I think we have to try. God's patient. And here's the thing that a Catholic priest said to me the other day, he said, John, the reason why we want to reflect the glory of God in these virtues that I just mentioned is not because we want to go to the Olympics, not because we want to get a gold medal. It is because we want to rescue somebody else. And you think about it. When we forgive and when we show mercy and when we are humble and when we give credit to someone else, we are basically rescuing them from a place where we don't think it serves them. It serves them as well as we don't recognize this. Now, today in America, in the fast pace of life, and with the fighting that we see so much inside of our religious institutions, we find ourselves in a position of where we sometimes wonder, what's our compass? What's right and what's wrong? What is my responsibility? What is your responsibility? We think about that all the time in a world that seems out of control. But our values are really written on our hearts. And let me illustrate this for a second. Do you remember when the flooding occurred in Houston? It was unbelievably devastating. I don't know if you've ever had water in your home, but boy, I'll tell you, it's like it never gets fixed. And these people didn't just have water in their homes. They had some of their homes washed away. They had water 10 feet high inside of their homes. And do you remember the stories of those people that got those little rubber dinghies and they were floating in the water, rescuing people off the roofs of their house or out of trees? And we stood back and we looked at that and we said, that's America. That's compassion. That's caring. You remember it. The same thing happened in Florida when the storms hit in Florida. And then, of course, the terrible mudslides in California that were accompanied previously by fires, neighbors opening their doors to one another, working together to save property and to save life. And then a couple tragedies. The terrible shooting in a Texas church. Man was a hero who went out with a gun and protected the remaining people in that church. And the slaughter of those people in that Texas church, the whole country grieved. Just like we grieved at the terrible tragedy that occurred in South Carolina in that African American church. And then I want to think about Las Vegas. Could you imagine putting yourself at a concert when shots begin to ring out and think about the people who pressed their bodies up against others, some they never knew. In order to shield them from the bullet, they were willing to take one. It was absolutely remarkable what had happened there in Las Vegas. And so it shows us that instinctively, if we can follow our conscience, something that George Washington talked about, if we can follow our conscience, we can by and large get it right. But what's been happening? Well, YouTube or 24-hour media or transit or the hustle and bustle, we're all caught up in it. We are all caught up in the fast pace of life. These values that are etched on our hearts can be eroded. And we see them being eroded today in the United States of America. In business, you know, we all, by the way, focus on politics, and I'll save it for last. Business. Can you explain to me how people working at an airline counter could yank a guy off of an airplane, treating him like he was some kind of a stuffed animal? Where were the people? Where was the justice? Where was the mercy? Where was the compassion? Wells Fargo. Let me open up some accounts for you. Got a guy here from Morgan Stanley. What do you think about how that bank did? I'll tell you what I've done. They're not doing state business for the last year, and I'm not going to let them do state business this year until they get their values straight. And no one's talking about sainthood here. It's just some things you don't do. Or Equifax. How long did it take them to finally say uncle? And I'm not sure that they still have. And I don't even want to have to talk to you about those people that live in families who knew things like EpiPen, who one day see the price of EpiPen for their children go through the roof, they can't afford it. Who makes these decisions? Who does this? Don't you know it could be you? It could be your family? Well, maybe it's the fast pace. How about sports? I'm reading these remarkable stories of these football players who have had this serious brain injury. One of them played for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Mike Webster. There was an article in the front page of the New York Times, I think it was the editorial section, about another player. He's brain damage. But if he didn't get the brain damage in the right year, he doesn't get anything. His family gets nothing. And they wander around, and they're destitute, and they're in pain, while some in that industry get rich. They haven't heard the last of me on that one. Or religion. You know, I've always believed if you want to be a preacher, then go wear a collar. And if you're going to wear a collar, don't be a politician. Take a pick. Now, I'm at the end of my term, so I can be both, okay? But for most of these people, you can forget it. This war that's going on inside of the evangelicals is so mystifying that I don't even understand it. That behavior by our leaders doesn't matter. Ask your kids to give you their opinion about what they think about that. How's things going in the entertainment business? How's things going on in Hollywood? It's pretty amazing, isn't it? The way these women were treated. And it was so quiet for so long. The press. I read an article yesterday. I didn't tell you about this, Bob, but the press is now deciding, as they do analysis, their analysis is revealing that the press is just now beginning to make stuff up. Doesn't have to be true, just make it up. And if you can get a hit or a click, and you can get money for something that you write, well, you're in business. Now, I happened to be with a publisher of the New York Times a week ago, and talking to him about the press and bias in the media, young guy, ethical guy, and I said to him, everyone in your business has to think about their responsibility. Because let me ask you a question. If all of a sudden the FBI and the Justice Department has been discredited, and the press means nothing to anybody, what are we supposed to believe in? What's the institution that's going to underpin us in this country? You think about it. That's serious business. Because as Ben Franklin was asked as he was leaving the Continental Congress, Mr. Franklin, what kind of a government are we going to have? And he said, we're going to have a republic if you can keep it. These things don't happen just because they're just a magic here. It's because our founders have earned it and people have fought throughout history to preserve this great republic. And these institutions matter. Politics. Are you kidding me? I don't know, maybe it's us and not them. Maybe we're so embedded in reading and studying the things that we agree with that we have no tolerance for any other point of view. And if that's the case, then how do you expect the people we hire to do any better? Because we hire them to do a job, and if what we keep telling them is what we think and no other point of view is acceptable, or maybe it's also the fact that they just can't get off the ship. You see, I know about this because I have been there. And we're back to Washington and giving up power. A friend of mine just got elected to the city council. Before he was elected, I said, let me tell you how this is going to work, Jim. You're going to run this campaign, and then once you win, they're going to tell you the way things really are, that you really ran a nice campaign, but you got to understand. You got to understand the way things really work around here. And then the next thing that's going to happen is you're going to have tickets to everything. You're going to want to go to the basketball game, and they'll have seats reserved for you and your wife, and you'll walk in the gym, and I mean, this is intoxicating. Or you're going to go to the restaurants, and they're all going to know your name. See, there's nothing more yesterday than yesterday's politician. I always said that if you're a congressman, when you retire, you don't have to have a phone because no one will take your calls and no one will ever call you. And if that's what you believe, then you struggle to hang on. You struggle to tell people what they want to hear. And you make decisions that are not in the best interests of the people you're serving because they're in your interests. It's not all of them, but we've seen a growing deterioration of the effectiveness of politicians because of partisanship and gerrymandering and political survival. It's not serving us well. So you have two opposites. You've got Florida and Las Vegas and the church shootings and Houston, Texas, and you can see that the values come out. But then at the same time, when we see the fast-paced life, we see those values are either being eroded or have eroded. So where's the hope? Where's the future? It's right here. See, I didn't know when I accepted this speech what you do for the Boys and Girls Clubs. You understand that what makes this country great is not what happens from up here down. What makes this country great is when we run our country from where we live up, where we don't sit and wait for somebody to come in on a white Charger to fix our problems. It's where we do what we need to do to realize is either as a humanist that wakes up every day trying to improve the world in which we live, or somebody that believes it is our job to reflect the glory of the God who created us and to exercise those values, then we need to run it from the bottom up. The Boys and the Girls Clubs. Hey, that's called a safe space. I met about a dozen girls, 13, 14, and 15 in my state, about a month ago. They came into a meeting with me, and they were sad. Their parents, or whoever was raising them, were all drug addicts. Nowhere to go, no one to talk to. Foster care, can't do foster care because I'm raising my brothers and sisters. We finally have found them a safe space in a YMCA where they can go and they can dance and they can paint and they can run and they can swim. I went to that YMCA after I met with these girls, and we're going to do everything we can to rescue them. But I don't want to rescue them as the governor. I want the community to rescue them. Because we can't have people in America continuing to come in on white Chargers to solve problems where we live. You know why? It's not sustainable. So what you do here through this group, whether it's the efforts that you've made for veterans, where you've shown, thank you, you've shown the spotlight on them, whether it's the Boys and the Girls Club, or maybe it's reiterating the values of patriotism. Because patriotism is not passive, it's active. It's about service. It's not about somebody else. And so, you have a problem with drugs? When you go to your religious institution, tell the preacher or the rabbi to start talking about it from the pulpit. Tell your principal at your school that before they tip off the basketball game to warn all the kids and all the grown-ups that are in that gymnasium about the dangers of drugs. Let's run a war against this horrible opiates. Let's save lives. And we can't just do it from the top. We have to do it, and we have to demand it. And if we do it, it'll be dayspring in our country. Our schools. Do you understand that beyond the issue of values, which I think is the greatest issue we face in America today, in all levels, the second biggest challenge we face is exactly the kinds of things that happened when the Haymarket tragedy occurred. We live in a digital world today, and this economy is going to look so much different than what it looked like 5 years ago and what it's going to look like in 10 or 15 years. The number one occupation in America is driving. We're not going to have drivers in America. We're going to have autonomous vehicles. You're not going to see people driving trucks. You're not going to see FedEx drivers. Not going to happen, folks. Just think about what's happening now at Walmart or at Amazon. You go into a store, there's nobody working in there anymore. Do you know that? You take the product off the shelf, you scan it, and you leave. I was in New York with my friend Doug the other day. We tried to order a pizza. We couldn't order it. We had to use some kind of an iPad device. And then when we had to pay, we had to walk around the corner and pay at a kiosk. There's nobody working there. So you know what I say to myself? Where are these people? Because you know who worked at these jobs before? Was mom with the second job helping educate the kid, or a kid trying to help pay his way through college. And this whole change in our economy has to be met in two ways. With a fundamental change in our education system, which I'm frankly not very optimistic about until the tsunami hits us, and the activity and inaction of businesses inside of our schools. Our schools' curriculum have to increasingly be set by business people, creating a curriculum and an education that gives our young people skills and resilience, and those skills and that resilience cannot end at graduation. It has to be a lifetime endeavor, because at the same kind of disruption we saw in 1865 or 1886, when you started this, we're going to be seeing in the next few years if we don't get it right. One school at a time, one classroom at a time, one kid at a time, and we can make it work. And the same is true for so many other issues. Mentoring. We now in Ohio have had, in the past few years, we have had 85,000 kids who have been mentored by 14,000 volunteers. 85,000 kids. Little program we started. And you know what they do as mentors? Young man, young woman, you got it. You can do it. You can be drug-free. You can grow up. You can show respect. You can have a car just like I have. You can have a suit just like I have. You can do it, kid. But here's what it takes. And this mentoring goes on for a year. And it changes lives. And I believe it saves lives. It ain't the mayor or the president or the senator who gives two hoots. It's what you're doing, what I'm doing, what we're doing to build a stronger community. And then finally, my real hope rests in a generation that I think looked at their mothers and fathers, these baby boomers, and they said, don't want any of that. Gen Xers and millennials, that's right. Our children and grandchildren. You know what's so great about them? Money, they'd like to have it. But they'd quit a job to be involved in work that had more meaning. You see, they're comfortable in a global environment. They don't believe in chaos and fighting and divisions or political parties or any of that other nonsense. They're living somehow on a higher plane. And I don't know, maybe some of us unwittingly have taught them these things, and maybe some of us have unwittingly taught them by bad example. I don't know. But I know that I have great hope in this young generation. I saw them all over the country. I see them all the time now in my work, and I have such great faith in them. So, ladies and gentlemen, what an honor for me to come here. And you know, I'm so comfortable being with you. I don't know what it is. You're always so nice to me when I'm here. I got a lot of Norwegian jokes tonight. Now that's got to stop. I'm not coming back if we get a lot more Norwegian jokes. But it's been a real honor for me to be able to be here. I hope you'll think about what I have to say tonight. You think about your purpose. We're all just failures and weak. But you know, the great thing about life is that we have a mulligan tomorrow, chance to brush ourselves off and do a little bit better. And it's not the big things. It's not that you have to hit a home run with men on base. It's just scratching out that little single, getting a base on balls, and moving progress. I believe that's what life is all about. And after 30 years in Congress and in the legislature and as governor of the state, I've seen about all of it. And I can tell you that we, you and me, we are the heart and soul and fabric of the great United States of America. And we're not going to let future generations down, are we? Thank you all very much. Thank you. So I said I'd take a few. I went longer than I thought. I didn't know how long this thing was going to be. So if you have a couple questions, I'll be more than glad to try to answer them.
Governor, I have a microphone here.
Or not answer them.
I have a microphone and one of my colleagues, if you have a question, and we'll, right here in the middle of the room, Governor, straight ahead. If you.
Sure. Hi, Governor. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I'm wondering, how has your wife and your daughters affected some of your opinions when it comes to politics and business?
Well, look, 1987, my parents were killed by a drunk driver. And it was a horrible, it was not only horrible because it was so horrible, but it was always a fear I'd had as a young boy. He mentioned in the intro, Bill did, that my mother worked late at night at a post office. My father used to pick her up, and they drive down this dangerous road, and I would always worry, are they going to come home tonight? And then, of course, they always did. And then in 1985, or 1987, they did not come home one night. And I was, I can't believe I'm even telling you this, but this started a real experiment for me, an investigation for me about what my life was really about. You know, I'd had a lot of success. I didn't have any relatives in Ohio. I won a magnificent victory to the legislature. I was a congressman at the age of 30. I mean, it's unbelievable because I wasn't any great shakes. I mean, it just happened. And then when that accident happened, it was like, John, my friends came to me and said, John, you better figure out who you are. And so year after year after year, I've applied myself to this issue. And I've read so many things about life and philosophy and religion, and my friends and I talk about these things all the time. And when I became governor, I changed. You know, as a congressman, I'm down there in Washington. Okay, so we do welfare reform, great. We do we do healthcare, great, great. We're like, we might as well be on Mars because we're not in the midst of it. When you become governor, you are in charge of a lot of stuff. And what's happened to me is, maybe it's the way I was raised, and I know it's been the influence of my faith, I just have a deeper and deeper sense for people that are not at the top. Now, I don't believe you should tear people down, but, you know, I just think that those that don't have what we all have, being in this club or whatever, I'm concerned about them, whether they're the mentally ill, the drug addicted, the developmentally disabled, the autistic, any of these things. I just have it's been an awakening for me. And you know, I've dealt with the issue of police and community and the violence. I'm dealing now with gun stuff. We're looking at what we should do about guns. I'm spending a lot of time on the issue of poverty, trying to revamp a welfare system that forces responsibility at the same time we help. And we're up 500,000 jobs, and we got $2 billion in the bank, and our pensions are secure. I mean, it's been remarkable. And the thing that I really like about it is the state itself feels as though no one's being neglected. Can you imagine that? How great a feeling that is for me, to know that we've been able to bring people together without selling out our principles. So I can be tough, but I just kind of look at things and say, okay, what is really the right thing to do? Now, I'm a bonehead, okay? I'm a hypocrite. Do you know anybody who isn't? I am. So don't be putting me on, I'm not on any pedestal. I'm just a slob trying to make it through by doing the right thing, by doing the best that I can do. And we live a normal life. You know, I don't live in some big mansion anywhere. I did move into the governor's mansion. There was like a fence around it, and I thought, how can I raise kids here with a fence around the house? And now that they're 18, I wish I had a fence around my house, okay? But, you know, and I got great friends. I have great friends, and they're ethical, and I believe in them, and they believe in me. It's very, very cool. It's been a great experience. So the governor's job has changed me.
Thanks for coming, Governor Kasich. I'll always refer to you as the adult in the room. So as the adult in the room, do you happen to have any advice for us in Illinois who have some political issues as a state?
No, I really don't. No, I think it's over. Move to Ohio, okay? No, I don't understand at all. You know, I don't know everything that's happening, but I think that, you know, Chicago, Illinois, I mean, are you kidding? It's such a great state, and it just, I don't understand why they don't understand that they're not business friendly, they're not, you don't have to give away the store, but I mean, you just can't tax people I mean, this is Illinois, this is Chicago. I guess my plea would be, don't just save us before we don't exist anymore. And that would be my message. And I'm not governor, I'm not there in the legislature or whatever, but I have found that over time, as hard as it can be, you got to learn how to compromise. You're not going to get anything done. And that doesn't mean you got to compromise your values, and that's always, of course, a tricky subject. But you can't just have everything your own way. You got to learn how to. Sometimes don't sweat the small stuff. So I don't know. I just wish you could fix it here.
All right, Governor. Next question over here to your left. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Governor Kasich, you spoke quite I'm over here.
Oh, I couldn't see you, yes.
You spoke quite eloquently tonight about compassion. And in that regard, I was interested to read that I think recently you've asked for a review of universities' compliance with Title IX, which is certainly legislation that has affected the lives of girls and young women over many, many years. I was hoping you could just speak to that, why you focused on that and what Title IX means to you.
Well, I mean, things just pop up all the time. You know, it's like police and community, because we had shootings and we had to deal with it. So I said it's something we ought to do. And the key is to find people that can be reasonable on both sides and do it with people who have credibility on both sides. So now I'm dealing with guns. So I had to find pro-gun people and people who are not so pro-gun. But the rule was, if you're not for the Second Amendment, you can't be on this thing, because we're not going to go out taking everybody's guns away. But are there some things that we can do that can reduce gun violence? And that's what we're working on. No politician wants to touch that issue, but I'm delighted to touch it. When it comes to this issue, I was very concerned about this a year or 2 years ago when I was reading about these things that were happening on our campus. And so my folks went and they visited with all the people at the schools and said, what is your policy? If a young woman comes in, or a young man for that matter comes in, and they're sexually assaulted, who do they go to? Who do they report this to? And how can evidence be preserved? Because in the case of a young woman could be raped, and she doesn't know what she wants to do. So you got to preserve the rape kit. And so we've been pushing that in our, across our campuses, and we're getting great compliance with state universities, great compliance, and mostly good compliance with the private schools. I mean, how can you read about Michigan State and not say, let's find out what we have going on in our school? I mean, we have to do that. I mean, you have to see what's happening. And so we're just going to look at across our state and figure out if we have a problem. You know, you can have problems. I don't know. I've got one of my great guys I work with here, Scott Milburn, and he and I work together on many things. I mean, he and I, for example, were involved in a school shooting in Chardon early on in my first term. I'd say, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, we just try to look at a problem and we say, what's the best way to fix this without looking on some kind of a political spectrum or using some political calculation. Who's going to be mad, who's not going to be mad? Look, at one point during my term, I think my approval rating was about 30%. You know, I was like one of the most unpopular governors in America. And, you know, now my approval rating is higher. You know, tomorrow could be lower. I mean, who cares? I mean, you look yourself in the mirror, you try to do the best you can. And that is, it counts for in business, right? Here's the hard thing. Remember I told you about the airline when they yanked that person off that plane? You all remember that story, right? I said to my wife, they should have done something. And my wife, you know, who's smarter than I am, she said, John, these people have mortgages, they have car payments, they've got kids in school. Everybody can't be like you are. Can you shut up once in a while? And the fact of the matter is, the question is, what can we all do to some degree? And if you're a politician, maybe the worst thing in the world isn't that you lose an election. I mean, I think you're going to find out you're going to have a better life when you're out. So, ma'am, I'm focused on that because I think it's an important issue. We'll see what we find. I'm not casting any, I'm not pointing the finger to blame anybody. I just want to find out what's going on. Many of you may have seen a report on 60 Minutes about these drug distributors. Now, I have a big drug distributor right in Columbus, right where my offices are. We looked at all the data to find out what was going on. We've now put very tough rules in place. Why? It's the right thing to do. So if you just are pursuing that, you know, following that compass, it isn't so hard. Just don't be mean about it. So, okay, I got to go home and go to bed. So thank you for having me. I hope you'll remember me when I'm out, and I'll see you again. Thanks.
I want to present to Governor Kasich this crescent with a picture of our club on the front.
There we go. Great. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Really appreciate you coming, everything you've done.
One of my daughters might end up going to Columbia College, so if she does, I'm going to call on you to keep an eye on her.
All right. Now we are going to have an afterglow down in, going to have an afterglow down in the main lounge, so everyone is invited to go down there. Thanks a lot for coming tonight.